Good afternoon and welcome to Climate Salad's Lunch and Learn or mid-afternoon learn about impact fundamentals with Jodi York, Chief Impact Officer at Kilara Capital. Thank you for joining us. When we embarked on the industry report, we discovered that this was a challenging area. Impact metrics, impact measurement, management, how to articulate that in a meaningful way to your customers, to your stakeholders. How do we create that value? My name is Charlotte, Ecosystem Director here at Climate Salad. And before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet. For me, that's the Gubbi Gubbi people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded, and I support a voice, the Uluru Statement from the Heart as well. So how are we going, before we get started, who is already articulating their impact? You can just put your hand. Jeremy, sweet. Oh, you do that wonderful reporting so well. Who knows this is an area they want to get involved in and do better? Of course, this is why you're here. Fantastic. What metric do you use, Jeremy, to articulate that impact?
Sorry, let's move my microphone here. For us, it's about how do we summarize and simplify a message that can be easily understood by others. I think that's for me, and then it goes across lots of different areas depending on what we're progressing and what we're moving towards. But some of the things that we're sort of showcasing are things like our carbon footprint, offset projects that we're working with, what percentage of energy is coming from renewable sources, and what partnerships and programs are we part of, what is our objective, in terms of getting to an outcome. So these are some of the simple things that we're sharing, and then you can drill down and find all the detail behind it as well, if that makes sense.
With your Missio tiles.
With the Missio tiles, yes.
And then it's about what impact does Missio create as well. So what is, when Missio's, like every large corporate is using Missio tiles, what impact does that create as well?
Absolutely correct. And that's core product in terms of where we go, because we exist to help share the story with the world effectively in a simple and interactive way, as a validated source of truth, but in a way that gives any business the ability to share that story, for all the different stakeholders.
Now, Matt has just mentioned, are you receiving bad feedback? I'm sorry, for me, I'm in a sort of... Might just be you, Matt. Maybe keep it on mute, but keep the questions to the chat. Jodi, if you're ready, I might hand over to you to run us through Impact Fundamentals 101. This is a wonderfully crowded call. It's great to see so many names and faces on here. Jodi, are you ready to go?
I am. I'll be honest that I've just had an unexpected little glitch with my technology. So I might be improvising a little bit more than I would have anticipated, but that's okay. Let's just turn my camera on.
Why don't you start with your wonderful background? Yes, with your camera on.
That's all right, because I can't solve the technical problems while I'm doing other things. Luckily, this is an area that I actually talk about quite a bit. Hi, my name is Jodi York. I'm the Chief Impact Officer for Kilara Capital. I have been in the impact space for quite a long time. So I'm on the capital side now, but I've spent a lot of time on that side of the table, both working with enterprises, working with not-for-profits and social organizations as well. But really, what gets me out of bed in the morning is helping organizations be more impactful, more evidence-led, more strategic, and more effective in doing those things. So what I want to talk about today, I do have, I've got maybe 20 slides to get through. I don't know what the level is in the room. Some of the stuff that I'll kind of breeze through fairly quickly. The point is you've got some slides to take away. You've got the information. You can go and look on them. There's some links in there. But I also want to be able to, leave a fair amount of time to talk about your businesses and the questions that you're coming to with this. So I will go ahead and get started. Can I actually, can I ask first, are there any burning questions anybody wants to get on the table before I start talking through what I was going to go through today?
So a quick question, Jodi, hoping that you cover at some point. It's
Yes.
around, like there seems to be a lot of talk around measuring impact,
Yep.
and there seems to be no sort of standardized approach or formulas or whatever.
Yep.
So it's around, how do you measure in a way that someone like yourself, if we were presenting figures to, would accept as, yeah, these are valid, these have been checked by someone, these have gone through some sort of, checking process that gives added validity.
Fantastic. That is, I'm really glad you've asked that one. And I will have some resources on that, because this used to be, if we were having this conversation, 5-8 years ago, it was a lot of fumbling around in the dark. These days, there's not actually that much excuse for fumbling around in the dark, because I've got colleagues like working night and day actually around exactly that question, standardization, because this is one of the things that makes it harder for both investors. As I said, I'm on the capital side now, but both investors and enterprises to spend more time talking about what we're actually doing rather than defining the terms about how we talk about it. So there's been an enormous amount of emerging standards in the last kind of 5 or 8 years, and they're sort of bridging it. I don't want to say consuming one another, but there's been kind of a move to pick winners and then just co-develop standards toward one another, so that we are having, rather than having competing standards, we have complementary standards, and we know exactly, this component lines up with this component and this one, and so that there's a one-to-one match, and that's agreed by standard setters and regulators and these kinds of things. So it's a great time. It's a great time to be launching on the journey of actually talking about your impact right now. So I'll go ahead and pop my slides up. What I'm missing actually is my my second screen, which has my notes on it. So I'm going to be, hold on just a second here. Let me think about this. I want to share screen here. There. All right. That. Okay, so that's visible to everyone, I assume?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great, awesome. So what we're gonna talk about today is basically, I'll put it out there right now. I can't tell you what to measure, because I don't know what you're doing and I don't know what you're trying to do. I can give you a lot of good principles on measurement. I can have a conversation once you're able to communicate what it is you're trying to do. But some of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is really about the getting what you're trying to do nailed down, because that actually underpins good measurement. It's really easy to measure things that don't matter really well. Don't do that. So I'll give you some tips on not doing that. So figuring out what actually matters, so that dictates what you're going to measure, what matters to you, what matters to your stakeholders. Figuring out, what it is that you think you're trying to do and why you think it's going to work, and then actually into the impact management piece. Oh, move you guys around because you're on my screen, blocking my content. Okay, so I want to start with a couple of definitions, basically. First, impact is a change in an outcome that's caused by an organization. So impact is a thing that happens regardless of whether you intend it or not. So impacts can be positive or negative, they can be intended or unintended. And the reason I say it happens whether you intend it or not, and whether you measure it or not, is, one of the things that we all have to be aware of is unintended, and particularly unintended negative consequences, because other people are watching out for these things. And so it allows you to stay ahead of, stay in front of concerns that your stakeholders might have, for instance, about supply chain, if you are aware of what that impact is. So there's a little bit of a journey on understanding that impact. And when we say outcome, this is basically something that is experienced by a particular stakeholder, whether that's a group of people like your customers or your suppliers, or in a lot of our case, since we work in the climate space, the planet. So in the case of the planet, usually with human stakeholders, we have to make sure that we've got representation on what actually matters to them. For the planet, we do let other experts speak on the planet's behalf. So we've got some set understandings about what is, what we need to do, what needs to change in an environmental sense, what's good, what's bad, that we rely on there. And impact management is just like any other form of performance management, right? It's the process of, in this case, identifying those impacts and optimizing them in the same way that you would with any other performance aspect. Understand how it works, and then evaluate on an ongoing basis. Is just strategic management, right? What's happening, whether that's what you want it to be happening, whether you can improve that by strengthening the positive performance and eliminating or reducing the negative aspects of performance. So impact management is not, it is different in some ways from other forms of management, but it is a form of management. So we talk about impact in 5 dimensions, and I've got some slides on this later on if you want to go in depth on it. But basically, the what dimension is what is the outcome that is changing. So, for instance, it's GHG emissions or biodiversity in a particular location. It could be, availability of clean energy, again, in a particular location. Could be what sort of material footprint of products. So what's the amount of resources that are going in for products going out? Something that the circular economy approaches focus on, that's kind of near and dear to my heart. And then there's a who aspect, and we think about the what and the who together, right? Because impact happens, the what happens to particular stakeholders. In the case of emissions, which I think probably is material for a lot of us, that's a global thing because it's all going out into the atmosphere and we all get to experience the same consequences. But for most impacts, it's happening to not just to anyone generically, but it's happening to particular stakeholders in particular places. And this is even true of a lot of the environmental impacts, where they're happening in particular bioregions. So you can specify what that is with what and who. And then we get into how much, which is kind of what it says on the tin. But during a period of time, how much impact of that to that what and who took place. The other aspects are contribution, which is about the what role your enterprise played in creating that outcome. So, was it what's the counterfactual? What was likely to happen? What can you compare it to have some sort of grounds for saying we're probably responsible for all of that, or 50% of it, or we contributed a small part to that change because it was probably going to happen anyway. And then risk, which is, we think about risk in all aspects of business, but in this particular instance, we can think about risks to impact, right? What is the risk that the impact is not what you thought it was going to be? So between the how much and the risk, we get a bit of a measure of volatility. So when we say, if I do what I want, what's in my business plan this year, it will be, I will deliver this much, I will deliver 30 million tons of mitigated emissions, for instance. we've got some risks around that. And so, that's got a plus or minus 15%. We've done some modeling. If this goes wrong, if that goes wrong, we understand what is likely to be affecting whether or not that goes to plan. So yes, in answer to the question from Charlotte, contribution is additionality is part of that. We can also, some things, additionality can be hard to really nail down. You have to make some choices and then just tell people exactly what choices, what assumptions you've made in setting that number. But yes, contribution and additionality are closely linked. So I'm going to start after some definitions with some caveats. This is not about metrics. And a lot of people come into impact thinking it's about measurement. But as I said, you can measure things that don't matter really well. So I want to get you to kind of shift your thinking in this conversation from impact measurement to impact management, because there's no point in having information that nobody's going to use, right? The point of information, the point of impact performance information is making better decisions, right? Making better decisions in your business, allowing your customers to make better decisions because they know what your impact is relative to the impact of the next company down the road. Allowing investors to make decisions on what we think is good in a good investment to deliver the kinds of outcomes that our strategy is set around delivering. So having information and not using it to manage is kind of missing the point. So impact management is where we want to talk. And secondly, a lot of the impact is also about storytelling. It's, you have facts, but facts then fit into a particular narrative that you want your customers your customers and your other stakeholders to understand, right? This is the story of your business. So the link there on the slide is to the Simon Sinek talk from, I think, 2009. He gave a TED talk on start with why. But all good stories do start with the why. And this is the opportunity for you to articulate what it is you're trying to do, and then use data to say whether or not you're getting there. And then you do that to demonstrate that what you're doing is effective and that people should back it, whether that's by buying your products or services, whether it's by investing in your company, whether it's by, snapping you up because in a buyout because you've got the best tech, and the big players should just buy your company rather than I don't know if anybody is actually at that stage yet, but so, this is the exit strategy for some companies. And I can't reiterate enough, there's some things you measure because, or that you keep data on because they're mandated in one form or another, or because, you might have an investor that wants them. But if nobody is using a piece of information to make decisions internally or externally, don't waste your time measuring it. If you're not measuring something in a way that is decision worthy, right? We feel like this piece of information is material and credible. Measuring for measuring's sake, and I say this as somebody who's really nerdy about measurement, is just taking away time that you could be using to devote to other aspects of your business. I've just realized that my earrings are playing havoc with my headphones there, so I'm just going to remove them. There we go. Okay, so if you're only going to measure things that matter, then we go to the question of, well, how do you know what matters? And this is, I want to talk a little bit about this because this is, I think when you have impact stories that are really quite compelling, that really connect with stakeholders, it's because the company really knows what they're doing and why. Francis Ford Coppola, film director, once famously said, a journalist asked him what makes a good movie? And he said, a good movie is where everybody knows that they're making the same movie. Right. So that, having that story embedded in your company really can make a big difference in driving your impact as well as your performance. Sorry, your business performance. I mean, impact is performance. So I was going to tell you a little bit more here about vision and mission, but that text is now someplace else. So I'm sure that other people have talked to you about vision and mission. But really these set your intent and your purpose. Because as shown in the Cheshire Cat graphic there, if you don't know where you're going, like it kind of doesn't matter what you do, right? So this is the groundwork for actually having impact measurement that helps you manage your business, because it measures the things that are material along the way. So your vision is your destination. You can think about your vision as your destination. You can think about your mission as kind of the vehicle by which you're getting there. And we're going to talk about theory of change, which is basically your roadmap. I would like you to consider, you may already have a vision statement, and I'll send a follow-up email with some questions, since I'm not going to do a good job of rattling them off the top of my head right now. But basically, you want a vision statement, in addition to being, catchy and precise, or catchy and concise. You want to be able to have something that people can see themselves in, whether that's your customers, whether that's other people in the field, potential collaborators, investors. It should be bold enough and distant enough that other people can invite themselves into that. They know that you have a shared purpose, right? Your mission is more specifically about, defining what part you play in that. But, if you are driving toward a net zero future, for instance, there's lots of other companies that are doing that. Lots of other investors that are doing that. This is one of the ways in which you have the opportunity to align yourself with those other entities. And your mission is kind of where you differentiate, right? You show where you are, where you sit within that, right? It defines your play space. It might define a time horizon, might define by play space for me, that's kind of your where in the industry you or where in the path to change you participate. So people know the specifics of what it is you do. And I have some great examples of those statements from some of our investee companies that I'll share with you later. But I also want to drill down, right? So I said at the beginning of this section that what you're doing, you need to understand how you create enduring stakeholder value. I wanted to unpack that a little bit, because this is your business model. It's also your impact model. And I wanted to just pick apart in these three little columns here what those things mean. Because one of my wearing other hats, I've also been a lecturer in the management faculty at Melbourne Uni. And I do work on sustainable business models. I'm wearing that hat. And it's really, you can link them together in various different ways, but most value creation comes down to one of three things, right? You turn low value stuff into high value stuff. So any kind of manufacturing is in here. You can do your problem solving. So when you go to your GP, you're not going to buy a service. You're like, I've got a cough and I want to no longer have a cough, right? So the value creation there from your GP is problem solving. You don't know what the problem is, but we're gonna try various things and we're gonna solve it. Same when you call the IT company, say my computer doesn't work, the mechanic, it's making a funny noise. so in the climate space, one of the places that this might be relevant is, for instance, having platforms that connect. You don't know how you're solving your problem, but here's some other alternatives that you might try to get to. So one of our investee companies, Grounded Packaging, runs a procurement platform basically for businesses to be able to solve for sustainable packaging, right? Because it's you've got a lot of variables, whether that's the packaging needs. Oh, I need to print on it. It needs to be durable enough for this. It needs to be of this weight. But then you've got all the sustainability issues, because there isn't one panacea. There isn't one silver bullet. Is it likely to be composted? Is it likely to be to end up in landfill? How long is it going to be reused? How long are people going to use it? So being able to understand the likely end of life considerations makes a big difference in what the actual impact of that technology is. Thank you. We're a big fan, because the question there was, the comment from Finn was that the procurement platform is very clever, because sometimes the climate space stuff is hard. Not everybody can be an expert, and things like procurement platforms allow one set of actors, one business, to have the expertise and share that out, and that might actually be core to their value creation. One of the other things that's one of the key value creation logics is network, just linking people together, right? So Climate Salad is a network, right? It creates the value by bringing people together that have different skills and attributes. Maybe some people are mentors and some people are mentees, right? So by bringing people together either virtually or physically, that's where the value happens. And then things are transacted in that network, but the value, those transactions wouldn't happen without the network. So your business probably combines 1 to 3 of those things. And the reason I mention all of that is understanding where the value creation happens and who is involved in it can really help you optimize your impact. Going all the way over to the right-hand side, stakeholder value. This goes back to the who and what dimension that I mentioned at the beginning of with the dimensions of impact. So what's the type of outcome? How important is it, and to whom? Because value is actually stakeholder specific, right? I ride a bicycle. You're not going to be able to sell me a Lamborghini. I know that a lot of people pay a lot of money for Lamborghinis, but I'm not your market. This just doesn't matter to me a whit. So it's all well and good to say that you are delivering things that have value, but not everyone will value them. And until you get, it's kind of like communication, right? Until you get the person who's saying stuff and the person who's listening to be on the same point, communication hasn't really happened. So understanding what the value is and to whom, because you probably have multiple value propositions, and things to consider there. Not all value is financial. So there's other forms of value. Might be, the value of the connectivity. It might be natural capital. Obviously, I'm not in favor of putting a price on everything, but it's one of the ways you get people to value things. And your stakeholders might be broader than you had thought about as well. So it's most businesses think about customer value quite relentlessly. But there's a lot of other stakeholder value there to be gained. Maybe that's, some businesses create an enormous amount of value by being a really great employer, and that is actually central to what they are, but that has material impacts. It reduces your overheads because you have higher retention. You're not having to recruit as often. Have a look at the comment here. Yes, 100% Patagonia. I was very excited about that. So again, they've made a very strong statement, not just about who their stakeholders are, because they will have other stakeholders, but they've said that only one of these really matters, and that is the earth. Most of us probably won't go quite that far, because there are other people to be creating value for. But this is a big part of how you get surplus value, if you will, out of the impact management process, is you're able to identify forms of value that you may not think about yet, that you may not have thought about. There may be ways to monetize, that there may be ways to bring that value back into the company, in a whole range of ways. And then the middle part there, oops, come on, there we go. It's just about, value. It's great to create value, but how do you capture it? And traditionally, we think about profit being value capture for the business, right? If you price something too low, you're not going to stay in business because you're not capturing any of the value that's being created. So you have to capture that in an appropriate form. Customer value, right? Do they like the product? Do they want to continue to use the product? Is it at a price where they're willing to pay for the product? But there might also be other forms of other things that need to be in place for your stakeholders to really benefit from that. For instance, if you're doing really awesome things, but not telling them about it, that may be value that's not being captured simply because people don't know. There may be, one of the things we see, I don't know if anybody's working in the development space, but one of the things that has a long history in the development space, in technology for development and environment, is if you haven't built in any capacity for people receiving the technology to actually repair and maintain it, the value doesn't last, because you put in some sort of amazing solar array, and then it's eventually used to dry the washing because nobody's there who can actually fix it. So thinking about, if you know what the stakeholder value is, making sure that things are in place for those stakeholders to be able to maximize that value. Because sometimes it's a really simple thing that can be identified by asking people. It's nice to talk to your stakeholders, or just by thinking through things from their end and their position, rather than just from the perspective of the company. Because it might be that there's things that you're doing which make sense from a company perspective, but are actually making things more difficult for your stakeholders. I have to get this bit of information from one system and this bit of information from a just different system, and they're hard to match up, for instance. So what I've got there is, this is Kilara Capital's version of this, right? So we know what the problem is that we're working on, which is there on the left-hand side. We know on the basis of that problem that the things that we want to focus on, because they're big and material, are energy transition. So backing transformations that make things clean, resilient, circular, smart, efficient. And then things like material footprint, which also drive the climate impact of products and services. So looking at things like reducing emission sources, increasing resource efficiency, reducing material footprint, and enabling, so this is the scale question, right? Enabling more people to make climate smart choices. Those are the things down the left are the problem solution of what we're doing. And then, it's displayed on the right, which basically tells you exactly what matters for us to measure. So this is how strategy drives measurement. You could come up with a bunch of measures, right? What is it? What do people measure in clean energy? And that might be relevant. It's likely to be relevant, but it doesn't tell you what your path to doing it is, because the primary purpose, in my opinion, of having impact performance information, as I said, is to make better decisions, but to be used internally. It's management information. Whether or not you choose to be externally transparent with that, that is a separate question. Having the information and being able to use it to drive better performance for your business is the first point, to understand what your impact is and how you could increase it. So here I'm disappointed that I can't read off the vision and mission statements to go with these, but this is, I've made a table. I've actually just pulled it out of our impact report, which was published today, on 5 companies that we've invested in. So I want to highlight in particular the bottom 2 rows, right? So there's the problem addressed at the bottom, like what is it seeking to address? And then what is its impact thesis? Thank you. I will do that, Silent. So, for instance, grounded packaging, I've told you what they've done, right? They're a sustainable packaging solutions platform, but that doesn't tell you what their impact is. Their impact thesis is reducing the life cycle, environmental, and climate impact of flexible plastic packaging, right? So this is the answer to what does solving that problem look like? Because that's the why of what they're doing. Watt Watchers does little IoT energy monitoring devices. And so we've got their impact thesis: powering homes and businesses with clean and efficient energy and reducing GHG emissions. So this is allowing, just by being able to have real-time data, you can make different choices about when and where you're consuming electricity. Great question from Charlotte. Do you look for an impact thesis more than a metric? We can help you. We can help a company. So we invest in growth stage companies. They often have more impact alignment at the stage that we start working with them than they have impact measurement. They may have some, or they may, as someone mentioned, I didn't catch the name right in the beginning, they have impact of their products, but they're not really thinking about impact of their business. So you're going to move that lens a little further back. And so, this is something that we can help our investees articulate, and but it's also part of our due diligence process. If we can't identify what that is, we're not necessarily going to make that investment, because we don't know why it's impactful and why it's driving our strategy of progressing toward net zero. If we can't have a really clear idea of how that's going to work, it's harder to sell that to customers and understand that that's going to drive growth for the business. But it's also a really important narrative tool for business, to be able to, particularly in the impact space, articulate what you're changing, not just what you're selling. I'll leave you with the rest of those. Ooh, okay. So Sam has asked, should words like decarbonize be avoided now due to overuse? I'd be interested to see what other people think about that when we open up for questions, because I think even with overuse, if it's technically correct and meaningful, it might not be as impactful because it's getting used a lot, and it's gets kind of mired up in a bit of greenwash, but it's might still be the best word for it. But that comes down to choice of how that message resonates with stakeholders. I absolutely agree with what Kate McHugh has just set up in here. If you're using decarbonize, you need to demonstrate how you're actually doing it. Nice to see you, Kate. I'm going to move on from these because I want to spend a little time talking about theory of change, because that's actually what that's how you get to these statements. It also determines what you need to measure. So basically, what is it that you're trying to do, and why is it going to work, right? So you've got your vision and mission, which kind of dictates your why, and your theory of change is your how. Your theory of change is a roadmap. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? What might we see? What will we expect to see along the way? Because sometimes impact might not happen for several years. So you need to know how, you need to have reason to believe that you're tracking in the direction toward that impact. And we do that by kind of working backwards. So we map towards ourselves from impact back toward, okay, so in order to get to there, what kind of outcomes do we need? So these are specific outcomes, happen with specific stakeholders. Let's define those. This is what we're targeting. And let's take a step closer from that and say, well, okay, in order to do that, what are the outputs that need to be? And these are usually kind of products and services. These are things that your company is usually quite tangibly doing. Yes, totally agree, Sebastian. Thank you. And from there, what activities would be required to undertake these outputs? And backing up from there, if that's the case, if we're going to do those activities, what inputs do we need to have? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right resources? So with theory of change, you kind of, you map it backwards and then you play it forwards. And one of the things that I had a bunch more that I would say about this, but I don't want to waffle too much, which happens if I'm if I'm going off piste. So if you don't have a theory of change, I really strongly encourage you to get one. I've got some resources I'm happy to share with you. This is probably the most important thing that I would say a company should have, in terms of, if we're having impact in the world, this is why it's going to happen. And this is the evidence we have that it's going to happen, because this is how you bring people on the journey. And it also tells you everything you need to measure, basically. So in our case, I'll work this one backwards. This is the one for Kilara. We're trying to get to net zero by 2050. And the particular things that we've identified, and you saw this on the previous slide, we are going to reduce GHG emissions. We are going to protect and enhance carbon sinks, right? Because carbon has to be absorbed back into the environment if it's not going to stay in the atmosphere. And we're interested in growing climate smart everything, basically, because we need to get more people involved in making lower carbon choices. Okay, well, how would we do that? Then we go back to the outcome. These are the changes that we want to see in the market. We want to see investments in a low carbon economy, and this specifies the things that we're doing. Part of our strategy is also about environmental markets, because we believe that for the period, it's not an end game, but for the period where we're still trying to deal with unavoidable offsets, we need to have robust carbon markets so that we can at least use the excess to grow supply of carbon projects. So it's a way to keep everyone involved, while also growing the weaker side of the market that's not going to grow itself without funding. And then from are we doing our job well? We're interested in having successful investments, develop field quality and size. Now we're not going to capture all of that because other investors will come in, but I actually don't care. More is more. We want to have more things in this area. And then from then, as we work our way to the left-hand side, you can see the outputs, right? These are the things that we are tangibly going to do. And some of those have kind of quality things attached to them. So if you look at the third one down in the outputs column, it says coherent investment information is available for management, right? Because we think information is critical to making good investments. So if we're not doing that, we're not going to be getting better. And then all the way on the left-hand side, you'll see these are the activities that we think we need to do. And then you can just run that kind of in columns, with 3 rows going to this, all the way toward the impact vision on the left-hand side, right-hand side. But, I just described it to you backwards from net zero back toward where we are today. But then you can read that forwards as a strategy. And every one of those things listed can be evidenced. And this is where it becomes magic, is I've got a strong theory of why these things are going to make a difference, how they support one another. And I can tell at every stage along the way whether or not they're happening. Now, we get information. And, it might be that we're doing the things that we said we can do, or that we said we should do, and it's not working. Fine. That's learning. Either the theory is wrong, right? We've missed something, we've made some bad assumptions, or, we didn't execute as well as we wanted to. But basically this allows you to, now you have a diagnostic tool to see what's not working. And you use your measurements that you basically have built yourself a dashboard by building a theory of change. Now, theories of change can come in all sorts of, there's not a strict visual rule. It's usually a map, but there's not a strict rule about exactly how you do them. Thank you, Charlotte. That's flattering. I worked on that one for a while, I won't lie. Oh, excuse me. Wait. Oh, come on, get back. Yeah. Okay. So now we're actually onto the metrics part. You thought this was about metrics, and now we're actually finally at metrics. But the reason, as I said, I was doing all those other things, is now you've got a map for what metrics you actually need that are material to your business, and help you make better decisions. You can also go out and look at what gets measured, and I've got some great resources on that. What gets measured in this space, and so you have a sense of what investors or other stakeholders might expect to see. And then you can see where that maps onto what you're doing. So, it allows you to have the facts that support a narrative, right? So now you have data that you can use to illustrate stories. It allows you to be outcome focused. We're doing stuff, but is the thing that we're actually interested in changing? Because people sometimes measure outputs because outputs is easy, but that's a bit like looking under the light for your keys that you lost down by the river because there's light and it's easier to see where the light is. And the other things I would say here is that in keeping with the tone I tried to set with the caveats at the beginning, if it's not decision worthy or you can't measure it well, don't do bad measurement. Maybe you want to find a proxy. Say we can't measure that thing. We're interested in measuring that thing, but we think that there's a correlation between A and B. And then footnote it, even if you do it internally, in how you talk about that inside your business, you do it externally. If you're going to be doing external reporting of these things, we think this is a good proxy for these other things. One of the bits of information that, while we are focused on climate, we're also interested in, growing the low carbon economy, but that means we need to have good jobs in the low carbon economy. So I'm actually interested in, for instance, the gender balance of the companies that I have, not because there's one right answer for that, particularly in, fields like engineering. Sorry, not to pick on engineering, but in fields that have been traditionally male dominated, it's not really fair to come for people for having less than 50% women. But if that's changing really rapidly, that is indicative that maybe there's an underlying problem. If you've got you have a retention rate, if your retention rate is steady, that's fine. It might be high, it might be low, that's okay. If your retention rate changes rapidly, that kind of implies that maybe there's some other problems in your company. So, you know, a lot of impact information is management information. Okay, I'm going to go on from there. Here's the other thing that I would say. In business, you may not have heard the term, but this is legitimate. We talk about emergent strategy, right? So there's the strategy on paper that we thought we were going to do, right? So this is basically how your theory of change works. This is your intended strategy, and great. This is how we're going to get there. This is our roadmap. These are the things that we see along the way. But we know that things often don't go according to plan. So as you can see here, you know, A was all right. B totally didn't work. B totally didn't work. There was a lot of different ways to do C. You know, we needed a whole lot more of one aspect than we thought we did. But this is how you use your impact information to get to the result that you're looking for and understand why you are or are not getting there. Okay, so just to talk about impact management, there's about 4 steps. There's lots of different versions, but there's less difference between them than you might think, and comes down to basically 4 steps. Setting strategy, and as with most things, you spend 80% of what you're doing, you spend there, because if you don't do that part well, the rest of it's not going to matter. And then the other steps are integrating it through your business. So how do you operationalize that in all aspects of your business? How do you optimize? So now that you've got some data, you're collecting data, what do you do with it to actually make better decisions and get better along the way? You know, so that's the emergent strategy piece, right? This is optimization, understanding what actually happened and how you're going to do it differently in the future. And then reinforcing. This is where things like verification and certification come in, if you want to go that way. Governance choices. I do strongly recommend the free training that's there. That's a link to a Coursera course that I was involved in developing through the UNDP. Pretty much, as far as I can tell, the best training on the market, and it's got very clever, engaging videos. Makes all of this quite clear. So I'm going to skip through a few things here. I'm just going to show you that they're here, so you can go back and check them out later. But I've got some content here on each of those aspects of impact: what, who, how much, contribution, risk, what we do with that information. So what kinds of things do those look like? And then now we're getting to what people thought they were going to get, which is there's actually a lot of work that's been done developing what are called core metric sets for different strategies. Thank you, Charlotte. So for most things you want to do in climate mitigation, if you go to the Navigating Impact project, that link that's at the bottom of this slide, you can go and look at metric sets that align to the who, what, where, who, what, how much, contribute, risk for those strategies that are based on things going on around the globe. It's a great resource to have linked evidence for why in your theory of change you think that X is going to lead to Y, and shows you what other experts in the field are using to measure exactly this. So each of these strategies has been developed by large stakeholder groups around the world. They've been tested, they've been hammered on. I'm going to stop that sharing because I've taken up a little more time than I wanted to. Yes, we can unshare now. Thank you.
Right.
Have I succeeded in doing that? Yes. Okay. And how about questions?
I think the first question is going to be, everyone's going to want to look at that slide deck or some of those lists of resources. So
Yep.
I just quickly, I can copy and paste that into the chat, but I'll open it up to the floor. Who has some questions for Jodi while she's here, Chief Impact Officer at Kilara Capital? Someone's.
I have one quick question. Sorry.
Yes, Sam.
Sorry to hog all the questions here. The selling a product. So just quick terminology, direct, indirect comparison. So if I'm selling a product, so we're reinventing air conditioning.
Yep.
It'll save 40% of the building's power. So I'm selling the product that enables that building to save 40% power. I presume I can claim that as a direct impact, even though it's the building owner that's ultimately saving the power enabled by our system, or is that indirect?
So this is where we get into the contribution attribution question. So if I think it can get confusing because, you know, if we get into like carbon credits, there's a financial math that goes with it of, you know, this is a credit and it's mine and nobody else can have it, right? Your product is directly responsible for that level of savings. Now you don't get to recoup that savings. So that goes in their pocket. And if it was a carbon credit, you know, that would go in their pocket and they would get to claim that one. But your product is directly does that. Now, so indirect impact is where it's basically has to be intermediated through someone or something else. You know, we're changing the amount of energy that's going into the grid that is renewable. And when people use it to power their cars, this is what happens. So that is the indirect outcome or impact rather.
Okay, thanks.
Jodi, that free Coursera course on SDGs, for startups, is it important to reference SDGs in there? Like, what are the or you know, the metrics there, or project drawdown? What are the sort of common language reference points that you pick up when you're looking through slide decks?
So it always depends on who the stakeholders are. And this is why identifying stakeholders is really important, because if you're trying to get someone's attention, you use language that makes sense to them, right? However, I think it's really easy to align to SDGs and there's no downside to doing it. And it also means that you don't have to make any justification about whether what you're doing is important, because the globe has decided that it is important. A worldwide consortium of big countries and small countries, et cetera, has said that we need to, you know, double energy efficiency. Like, that's your justification done. And then you can say, you know, relative to those targets, this is what we're doing.
That's why I'm going with the companies.
So the other, sorry, go on.
Oh no, sorry, go Jodi.
You'd asked me about SDGs, and one of the things I like about the Navigating Impact project is that Iris Plus, which is their taxonomy, which I'm a big fan of, has basically sought to be the Rosetta Stone of impact taxonomies, because there used to be a lot of them. And so there's a fixed concordance, like somebody else maintains the taxonomy, so there's not drift. You just get a new version every once in a while and you say, hey, this has been updated and it now aligns to these things. But it also, there is a known concordance between what's in there and what's in other places. You know, this is exactly GRI 27.1. This aligns to, you know, this, what is stipulated in the carbon disclosure project questions on these things. Like, you know, what other categories that information will fill. So it's got a great level of kind of granularity. And if you keep your information relatively granular, you can use it for lots of things, because you can always, you know, aggregate it on the fly. And that's a lot easier than trying to decompose it when you need it.
Jodi, 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from supply chain. Yeah.
That's correct.
So large transport companies are being pressured to decarbonize, go electric. Going electric reduces 30% of their load capacity because their whole business model is based on weight, distance, time, and so forth. So unless there's a collective intelligence across the supply chain, then you're going to end up with the Walmarts or whoever it might be diagnosing the system as they know exactly what you should do, but not what they need to do. So unless there's a collective intelligence across this, doesn't it all kind of go to greenwash a lot of the time?
I think Jodi's going to take a few more minutes to answer that question because it is a big one, Pat, that it's I just want to take this opportunity because we're just a bit over, just to say thank you while we have a mass of people on here. And also, I'm sure everyone's trying to figure out, how do we ask Jodi questions, pepper her with this? Do we go to Kilara, and is there a Calendly link? Can we book time, or how do we get in contact with you for further questions? And on behalf of the Climate Salad Group, I just want to say a huge thank you. It's immeasurably hard, and you've made it a lot easier after this. Just, you know, I know it's only an hour, but that session was really insightful. Thank you, Jodi. Oh, Jodi's put her email in the chat. So thank you. If you do need to drop off, please do. And Pat, or Jodi, if you want to answer the question, go right ahead. I just thought I'd let everyone off the hook because I know time is valuable. So thank you, everyone.